Hello, I'm Mark Potok, the director of the Intelligence Project of the Southern Poverty Law Center, and today I'm joined by Casey Sanchez, a writer for the investigative magazine that we publish, The Intelligence Report. Casey and I today are going to discuss a remarkable story that he wrote for the latest issue of the Intelligence Report that raises serious questions about a very well-known Arkansas televangelist. Casey, who is the televangelist in question, and where's his ministry at?
This is Arnold Murray of Shepherd's Chapel. Technically, Shepherd's Chapel is based out of Gravette, Arkansas. It's a tiny town of 1,800 in northwest Arkansas. But chances are, you've probably heard of him or Shepherd's Chapel from TV. He's on over 225 TV stations throughout the U.S. Any given night, usually between midnight and 6 a.m. You can see Shepherd's Chapel often in 3 or 4 hour blocks.
So he's huge out there. One of the things that you write, really the core of your story, you say that Murray attacks a group that he calls the Kenites, K-E-N-I-T-E-S. Who are the Kenites, Casey? That's not a name you hear in Sunday school.
Sure. Well, actually, if you had a chance to go to Sunday school, I suppose the Kenites are known in most traditional Judeo-Christian understanding as a nomadic clan of Midianites that Moses married into. However, in Murray's understanding, the Kenites are a group of people technically descended from a sexual union between Eve and Satan. And in Murray's understanding, a lot of his followers also tend to believe they're Jewish or of Jewish ancestry. This is because Murray says that the Kenites won the Six-Day War in Israel. That people suggest that he's equating the Kenites to the Jews, but there's so many references throughout his preaching and his sermons equating the Kenites with Jews.
Yeah, I notice in your story, for instance, he says the Kenites are responsible for the death of Christ. He says the Kenites are the people who claim to be chosen, right? So that really does sound an awful lot like the Jews.
The Bears. The Bears.
Certainly, and that's how a lot of his followers, once they're a few years into Shepherd's Chapel, tend to think that way as well.
I should try and explain when we say that this theology, in fact, sounds a great deal like Christian identity, which is probably the preeminent radical right-wing theology out there in the United States. For listeners who don't know, very briefly, Christian identity is a theology which has been formed over the course of several decades in the United States, which claims that Jews are actually biologically descended from Satan. In other words, just like you said, there was a sexual union between Eve and the serpent and, the Jew.
The Bears. The Bears.
Quote unquote, is the descendant of that union. Identity believers basically say that Jews are the preeminent enemy of both God and white people, who are the real Hebrews of the Bible, and that people of color are soulless non-humans who were never in the Garden of Eden at all. In fact, this is the theology that is probably dominant among our Klan groups in the United States and many neo-Nazi groups as well. Would you say, Casey, that Murray's preaching really is essentially, when he talks about the Kenites, he's really talking about the Jews?
The Bears. The Bears.
Well, Murray will always say no to that answer. On his website, he has a section called An Answer to Our Critics. Again, because there's actually been a number of traditional Christian ministries who've been writing against Murray well back into the early 90s, who feel that his theology is deeply anti-Semitic, and in a few cases they also allege that he's racist. Again, if you go to the websites of his followers, they're very, very concerned about this group he calls the Kenites. There's a MySpace group which is worried that the Kenites might be of Asian ancestry, or there's all these comments that they're half Asian. Then there's other Murray sites which they've interpreted Murray's theology to mean that the Kenites clearly are Jews, and they're citing horrible anti-Semitic frauds like the Protocols, the Elders of Zion, to support their views. Murray himself, again, he rarely even uses a word like Jew. He would say, when I refer to the Kenites, I am not talking about Judah. Again, this sort of older style language he'll use to talk about it that confuses a lot of his listeners and his followers, but at the same time sort of seems to be winking and nodding that I'm not going to say Judah or Jews, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'll say, I see that in your story, you quote Murray saying last year that the Talmud, which is, of course, the Jewish holy book, is, quote, the filthiest piece of literature ever written. And then he talks about how they love it, whoever they might be. So, yeah, it does seem hard to read that and not feel that he's talking about the Jews.
The Bears. The Bears.
Right, that was from a sermon he has that he distributes on still on audio cassette tapes. It seems in this day and age everything would be MP3 or internet, but there's something around 400 or 500 Murray sermons you can order directly from his office in Gravette, Arkansas.
Casey, you talked to Michael Barkin, who is really the preeminent scholar of Christian identity, the man who wrote the book that really explained what identity is. What did Barkin have to say about Murray? Did he think he was really an identity preacher, or that he was something else?
Well, Barkin said Murray is clearly teaching serpent seed. Again, this belief that there's a distinct group of people that descended from a sexual union between Eve and Satan. Clearly a theology, rejected, I think by pretty much every religion except Christian identity. And he wasn't quite sure on how Murray had stumbled upon the name Kenites. In traditional Christian identity, they'll refer again to a group as the descendants of Cain, and sometimes Cainites. And Barkin suggested, perhaps it was just simply the similarity of the names that led Murray to jump onto this particular word and this particular group.
Yeah, having written about radical religion for some years, that does seem entirely plausible. I've seen many cases like that. Casey, you talked to Arnold Murray refused to talk to you about any of this, but you did talk to some former members of his congregation. I wonder, what did they have to say?
Well, I talked to a few members, most of who were really reluctant to go on the record with me in any sort of fashion, just because they feared harassment or scandal. But there was a man named Paul Strangini who is one of the few former Shepherd's Chapel students who's become a very vocal critic of Murray. He was just as devoted to Shepherd's Chapels as anyone could possibly be. I mean, he had bought all the audio cassette tapes, would listen to them on cross-country trips. He went to they hold a Passover ceremony in Branson, Missouri every April, although it's different from a traditional Jewish Passover, obviously, including the fact that it's usually held according to the Jewish solar calendar, not the lunar calendar. In any case, Paul Strangini actually even got married at Shepherd's Chapel in Arkansas. But around in the late 90s, he began just to become really repulsed by what he saw as an anti-Semitic tendency in this, as well as Murray's preaching about the end times just sort of rang pretty false to him. Murray has actually predicted the world was going to end, or that there was going to be an Antichrist that came back in 1981. It's been 27 years since then. Obviously, that failed to happen. And there's a number of Shepherd's Chapel students like Strangini who get really involved in this, again, because he's the first person they've found in their life that's actually going through the Bible verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And that's the primary appeal of Shepherd's Chapel. It's a chance to really explore the Bible. And it's not until several months, if several years later, that they learn all this stuff about the Kenites and begin to be questioned. What is the point of this? Is this about Jewish people? It's a sort of bait and switch going on.
Well, I have to say, having read the story, it's pretty hard to conclude otherwise. In any case, it's an astounding story. I'd urge people to take a read. It's on our website at www.intelligencereport.org. What's probably most surprising about the entire story is how very little attention Murray's theology has really gotten up until now. Maybe that will change, Casey, because of your story. Thanks very much for being with us. Thanks to everyone who listened in, and we hope that you found this interesting.